Hi, thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Dan Chodorkoff. As Eleanor mentioned, I co-founded the Institute for Social Ecology in 1974 with Murray Bookchin. My academic background is in cultural anthropology, but I have to say that my passion and my engagement has really been with social ecology, using anthropology as a lens. What I'm going to do is lay out a brief, very brief introduction to social ecology and how the ideas of libertarian municipalism emerge from this particular philosophical position. And then my understanding is Brian is going to talk about the application of the ideas in social movements that he's been involved in. Bea is going to talk about her experiences in applying the ideas in Burlington, Vermont, working with the Burlington Greens, where she ran a campaign for city council. And then Eleanor is going to talk about the very exciting re-emergence of these ideas in a totally different context, which is, of course, the Kurdish Revolution, or Java Revolution. So, to begin with, very briefly, social ecology, and you have to excuse me, I'm going to offer a caveat to begin with. It's a complex philosophy, and I really can't do justice to the ideas in the 15 minutes I've been allocated. So this is going to be a very broad overview and a gloss. But essentially, social ecology is an interdisciplinary perspective that draws on anthropology, philosophy, history, the biological sciences, particularly ecology, to develop a coherent philosophical framework that can allow us to both understand people's relationship to nature and transform people's relationship to the rest of nature. And it is that transformative element, that reconstructive element, that I think makes social ecology a little different. We're not really an academic discipline because we also engage in praxis. We try to take the ideas and apply them in various settings, then come back, re-examine the ideas in light of our experience, and then if necessary, reformulate the ideas and try to apply them again. And we've been at this for over 40 years at the Institute for Social Ecology. Obviously, we haven't created a revolution yet, but we have, I think, had some small influence in the way that contemporary social movements think about organizational forms, and hopefully can provide some ideas that can spark others to take things to the next level. So, social ecology begins with an examination of nature. What is nature is the essential question that social ecology asks. We have a dialectical understanding, an evolutionary understanding of nature. Nature for social ecology is natural evolution. It is a process. It's not a singular entity. It's not out there. People are understood as a part of nature, not distinct from nature, moving away from the kind of traditional Western dualism when this question is addressed. We also try to understand that there are tendencies within nature or principles that we can extract from nature. And it's our belief that in order to reharmonize people and the rest of nature, which is ultimately the project of social ecology, the creation of an ecological society, we need to take these principles into account. And we need some way to apply them both in our communities and, very importantly, in our politics. Briefly, some of these principles are the non-hierarchical nature of nature. There is no hierarchy in nature. The notion of the lion as the king of beasts, or the lowly ant, are really projections of human social arrangements on the rest of nature. Nature itself functions in a mutualistic way. This is the second principle that we would extract and try to apply. We don't really have a hierarchical food chain. Rather, we have a food web in which varieties of species interact and are interdependent, so that interdependency has to be recognized, and mutualism is a principle that we would put forth. We also understand that nature is evolving and emergent, and suggest that nature moves towards ever greater degrees of diversity, complexity, and freedom. Freedom being defined as self-consciousness has the ability to make choices. And we see in nature, very importantly, the principle of homeostasis at play. Nature is dynamic, nature is constantly in flux. When we talk about finding a balance in nature, it's not a static balance, it's a dynamic balance, and that's what the principle of homeostasis addresses. We see as well the principle of unity and diversity emerge from the natural world. The most complex ecosystems are also the most stable ecosystems. The more species you have interacting at various trophic levels, the greater the stability of the ecosystem. You can have the collapse of one of those species without the whole system collapsing. So we see that notion too, unity and diversity, is one that has to inform our society and our politics. Social ecology takes these principles that we extract from our understanding of nature and establishes them really as an ethical framework. And that ethical framework, in turn, informs the politics of social ecology, so that we believe what we need to do is create a new kind of politics that draws on principles of non-hierarchical organization, mutualism, unity and diversity, moving towards ever greater complexity, diversity, and freedom, and one which is homeostatic, one which is able to adapt and still maintain balance. So what does that look like? This is all very abstract, I realize. But when we translate these ethical principles into politics, what emerges is an outlook which Murray Bookchin called Libertarian municipalism or communalism. At various points, he called it different things. And what it is essentially is a decentralized form of ecological politics in which these principles can be brought to bear. The idea of libertarian municipalism is really rooted in directly democratic organizational forms, and there's a long history and a long tradition that informs this development as well. We see and take inspiration from, of course, the original democracy of ancient Greece, the demos, which was a directly democratic system in which 40,000 citizens of Athens, and acknowledging, of course, that women were not citizens, that slaves were not citizens, that the medics were not citizens. It was a very limited group defined by ownership of property and being a male member of the Athenian polis, but within those limitations, it was really quite a remarkable development. They had 40,000 people meeting every year on the Pnyx in ancient Athens. If you've ever been to Athens, you can go and see the Pnyx today. They elected a council of 500. They rotated the head of state, which changed every day. And at one point in one's life, virtually every Athenian citizen could expect to be a functioning part of that governing body, and there was an understanding that it was the definition of citizenship embodied a responsibility to participate in civic affairs, and politics was really seen as the highest expression of one's humanity. And of course, the political system didn't simply function on that one day a year when all the citizens met. It was an ongoing conversation which happened in the marketplace. Debates went on all over the ecclesia. This is where Plato taught his students, where Aristotle taught his students. So politics was also seen as an educational process. And we see this as one of the inspirations for libertarian municipalism. Another very direct source of inspiration for libertarian municipalism grows out of the New England town meeting tradition of government. I live in Vermont, actually 3 of us live in Vermont, and we still have functioning town meeting government where one day a year everyone in town gathers together and makes decisions based on the principle of one person, one vote. Every citizen makes decisions which determine the course of our town for the next year. And historically, of course, this was the basis for all governance in Vermont and New England, where the town meetings sent representatives to a legislative body and they were accountable at the annual town meeting. That, of course, has changed. The purview has increasingly been diminished. But nonetheless, we've been successful in using town meetings not only to deal with local issues, but also to raise issues of statewide and national import. The big movement to ban nuclear weapons in, was that 1990s? 80s, in the 80s, began with referendums held at town meetings in Vermont, where overwhelmingly the towns voted to oppose nuclear proliferation and to diminish nuclear stocks. We've used town meeting campaigns around issues like genetic engineering, where the Institute and Brian particularly were involved in organizing. And we had 86 town meetings around Vermont, pass resolutions calling for the banning of GMOs, genetically modified organisms. More recently, we had referenda on nuclear power in Vermont, and we were successfully able to influence the state government so that we were able to close our one nuclear power station. We used them more recently to oppose the reversal of an existing pipeline in northern Vermont to bring tar sands to Portland, Maine. So there is that tradition. And of course, on the left, there's also a long tradition of direct democracy. The sections in Paris and during the Paris Commune are a classic example of ways in which neighborhoods were organized and were able to use directly democratic forms of decision-making to put forward a revolutionary program. The Soviets, originally in the Soviet Union before they were co-opted by the Communist Party, were also expressions of direct democracy. And of course, if you've studied the Arab Spring, we know that many of those uprisings actually began as a result of neighborhood meetings and neighborhood assemblies. So briefly, just to outline how libertarian municipalism works, and then I'll be done, because I think I've done about long enough. We begin with the town or the neighborhood as the basic unit of governance. From there, we create regional or citywide assemblies in which each assembly, neighborhood assembly or town meeting, sends a representative who is recallable and accountable, and it doesn't function as an executive, but rather simply carries out decisions that have been made at the local level. We recognize that we try to maximize the autonomy of each small unit, but we recognize that there are functions that require coordination over a larger scale. So the principle of confederation is the flip side of decentralization in this case. And we see this confederation developing from the local and regional to the continental and ultimately to the global. And for social ecology, this is a new form of politics. We reject the notion of statecraft. I think it's become all too clear in recent past what the limitations are of the traditional political forms that we have to work with. We've seen that even when leftist parties have been able to gain power, like Podemos in Spain or Syriza in Greece, the structural limitations of that system have really crippled them and made them ineffective. We've also seen here in the US, we're seeing it with the Sanders campaign today. And believe me, we know Bernie Sanders very well in Vermont. And you know, Bernie's great for what he is, but he's working within a system which is very limited. And we believe that in order to actually attain the kind of society that's required if we are to reharmonize people in the natural world, we really need to move beyond statecraft into a new form of politics. I think this is an important development because I've been active on the left for 50 years, for most of my life at this point, and I've seen that time and time again we keep coming up against the limitations of protest, the limitations of third-party organizing, the limitations of backing progressive candidates within the existing two parties. So we really need to transform that system in a very basic way, in a revolutionary way, to transform the underlying structures. Of course, there's an economic program that goes along with this kind of decentralized, directly democratic approach. We call for the creation of a moral economy, and clearly we don't really have time to develop that today. But I'm trying to give you a sense of the breadth of social ecology and the way that these politics really do emerge out of a coherent philosophical outlook. And I guess I'll end there. Thank you.